This episode brought to you by Nomadic Research, built for the wild and forged in adversity. Somewhere between the front lines and the firelight, a vision was born. The founders of Nomadic Research spent years in the harshest environments on Earth, where grit and resilience weren't just words, but a way of life. They saw a need for gear that could handle anything, gear that wasn't just built, but built to last. From battlefields to backcountry trails, every piece of Nomadic Research gear is designed with one mission: unyielding performance for those who refuse to quit. The founders believe in patriotism, personal responsibility, and the freedom of the great outdoors, because adventure isn't just a weekend escape, it's a way of life. Born in the heart of Afghanistan, forged in adversity, and built for the wild, Nomadic Research is gear for those who go further. You can start your adventure at nomadicresearch.com.
It was just like white and then nothing. I didn't hear anything, feel anything. And then I woke up and felt my leg on fire because I had a piece of shrapnel on my left leg. And that's kind of that's what woke me up. I was the first one up in the back. And then, it was just everyone was fucked up. I thought I was the only one that lived because no one else was moving. I had that questionable killing of that man. And then I got, I don't know if it was an inquiry or investigation, whatever the right word is for that. But I got questioned by our judge advocate general officer. And that was the first time I felt like, okay, I did everything that we were allowed to do, supposed to do. The man was in our wire. We were authorized to kill anyone in the wire. And I did that. And now I'm getting questioned for it. And so now I'm like, well, why do I have this happening? Now, why am I even here? Why are we here if I'm doing my job and now I'm going to get looked at for it? Now I don't want to do it, And it was just extremely confusing. And I think that's a good way to look at the entire war. The survivor's guilt thing is hard. That's a hard thing I think that's something that continues to, it's like, there's always a why. Why am I still here? And I better be doing something. If I'm still here, I better be doing something that's worthwhile at a bigger picture than just myself or my family. And I think that when I've struggled the most with the suicidal ideation and everything is when I don't have a clear or even a path to even go down for the why. And so feeling lost. And that, that's when I struggle the most.
What's going on, man? Welcome into the studio. I'm so glad that you could be here.
Thank you for having me. It's been a long time coming. So
yeah. Dagan or Hoot hooked us up together.
Yep.
You had went to his studio and recorded with him, and that day that you recorded, he sent me a message and said, you got to get this guy on the show. And I said, okay, well, you're the one that can make that happen, so make it happen. And we got in touch with each other. We started talking. You sent me the book, and wow, fantastic. I told you before that the way I looked at it was just a living dichotomy. You couldn't have been a more different person from when you started this book to the end. But the first question that I have about the book is, you talk about it in the preface or the introduction that you had sent the book out to some people to read and tell you what they thought and all that kind of stuff. And you had one Marine tell you, this is not your story to tell. And right from the very beginning of this book, I'm thinking, I don't understand. Why is it not your story to tell? You're talking about you, and you make it very clear that even though other people's names are in this book, this story is about the struggles that you had. So why would he say something like that?
So the only thing I could gather and what I put together after that, because I put the book down and just kind of sat on that for a long time, like years. And I was like, it felt selfish writing this from the beginning, because it's like, why do I feel special to write a story? I didn't feel like I'd done anything special. I've done a lot of the same stuff that most guys do who were in at the same time I was. So when he said that, I just kind of set everything down and I thought about it. And when it came down to what I suspect is that I wrote about the incident on June 15th with some of the guys from 2nd Platoon who died. And I went into detail from what I heard other people tell me, like what happened. And I think that struck a chord with the gentleman that read it at the time, because it was very personal to him. He was there. And So I just took it out. I took out the parts of the book that were hearsay for that moment and just put my own experiences there. As much as the hearsay from that moment does affect, it would have affected me. It did affect me, but I felt like I was doing a disservice or something to the guys in some way by not letting someone else that was present tell it from their perspective. So that's what I ended up doing. I actually ran into him at our 20-year reunion like about a month ago, and we talked. I told him that when he reads the book, he's the one I'm referencing, and we both kind of laughed. And he's like, "Man, I don't know why I said that. I'm sorry." So just time, right? Time went by, and we just kind of left it at that. So
Well, and I think you're exactly right, time, because that, once again, going back to this book, time, I don't know if it heals all wounds, but it definitely pushes them along for recovery. Because there's so much of this stuff where you have said stuff about yourself and about how you acted in combat that I've never heard another person say. You approach the elephant in the room. You talk about becoming a monster, you becoming a terrorist yourself in someone else's country, and you really put it out there in raw emotion. With that, before we kind of get into your history and stuff, why do you think that you wrote it that way?
um because after reading so many different, like, so over the last 10 years I started reading a lot. Like, for a long time there I didn't read much of anything, and if I did, it was a novel here and there, that it was a military novel or something. But I definitely didn't have any interest in touching like Marine Corps memoirs or combat memoirs or anything until like 10 years ago. And I just started really falling in love with them. And there was a common theme with the ones that resonated most with me. And that was like with the Old Breed is one, for example. And the things that stood out to me in those were the rabbit hole that they went down and the experiences that they had that felt very dark. And I was like, well, I don't really feel alone in that. I can really resonate with that, even though it was World War II and the combat was different. And I'm not comparing myself to the same level of that, but still the things that keep you up at night aren't the things you did great, you know? And so I felt like, well, if this is bothering me, I'll kind of just put it all out there and say, fuck it. Like, risk my reputation, risk everything, because at least I can put it into the world and say, you know what, I fucked some things up. And I hope that through writing this, it's kind of a redemption of my soul in a sense. And putting it out there is saying this does happen and no one is, I don't think anyone's immune from it. Given the circumstances of, um, you know, I think for me, it's like a cautionary tale. If I can have young military members or young, combatants read it and say, well, I don't want to make that same mistake, knowing that 20 years of my life has been spent ruminating on it and it keeping me up and leading me to suicide attempts, down the road. It was, something that I felt I needed to put out there, because otherwise I would just be lying if I just told like a war story where everything was great. And that's just not the case. So,
Do you maybe feel a little bit too that if you don't make amends now, that once you're gone, it's going to be too late? And even though the world doesn't know what you did, you will always know what you did. So do you think there was a little bit of trying to get that redemption, paid in advance?
oh, for sure. And for a long time there, I was like, oh, I can't talk about this stuff. Maybe I'll get in trouble. Or with all the political culture of our country right now in the world, it's like I could get destroyed and doxxed and all these things for some of the stuff I talked about that we did. But at the same time, I start talking to more like Vietnam vets and everything at VFW meetings or at just like out in town. And over the years, over the last 20 years, and like some of the stories that they aren't proud to share are the ones that haunt them the most. And so a part of me is like, this has to get out. We can't be a country who has who goes to war and says we did everything great, or all of our people act accordingly. It's just not the way it is. You can't go to war and then have like the thing I've kind of been riding lately is going to war is a no holds barred decision. And if it's the last political decision that we need to make as a country, then we need to have that attitude. Otherwise, we'll never win. And that's why I firmly believe we haven't won, if you want to look at it in that sense, any wars since, World War II in a sense. We've done great things in conflict here and there, but we end up always fighting ideology or a an enemy who's willing to go further. And so we're just going to be standing there with our hands tied, losing people for no reason.
You're growing up. You grew up with a dad that was a Marine, and I feel like there was always that kind of patriotism that want to serve in the house. I want to talk about your relationship with your dad. What did
Yeah.
it mean to you in all of the stuff that he did by, being able to get you where you could walk at your high school graduation? And he made sure things happened behind the scenes. What did that kind of relationship mean to you? And what does your father mean to you, if you could put it into words?
I mean, he is the person who guided me into manhood, into becoming where I'm the person I am today. And I always looked up to him growing up, and I watched him. He always worked very hard. And so I had that same work ethic. And so I appreciated, that if I work hard, if I put in the time, put in the hours, the energy, something will come out of it. And when I joined the Marine Corps early, went to boot camp, graduating early, and seeing what the Marine Corps was, when I got my orders that I couldn't walk and get my diploma, I was like, well, too bad. Like, that's the Marine Corps. Who the fuck's going to tell the Marine Corps what to do? And well, that's my dad. So he walked into the recruiting office and I was like, don't, Dad. No, I'm a boot. Like, I don't want to make my life hard.
Right.
But he went in and whatever he said, he said. And the next thing you know, I have recruiter's assistance orders. I was very grateful for that. And it was just kind of like, okay, if you stand up for what's right, looking at that, it's like if you stand up for what's right and stand up to holding to someone's word, and then pushing that, if it doesn't go that way, then usually good things will come of it. And so that's kind of where I started seeing how the world works, even though it might be the military or anything else. And he really set me up to excel in life with just kind of the foundation of honesty, integrity, and I think that's why a lot of the beginning parts of the book I held myself to such a like my feet to the fire after I got back, because I was like, why did I do that? That's not any of the values that I grew up with. And we have a good family. I talk about my dad a lot in the book, but my mom and dad are married still, no divorce, they've been a very strong relationship. And I'm grateful for that too. And she's just as much of a part of it as, being behind him and helping him to be the man he is. And I feel very fortunate that my wife is, very similar to that extent. So
I want to bring them up for a reason, your mom and your dad both, because you saw in the beginning, before you ever even deployed, you saw what bad behavior could do to your father. And we're going to get into that. But
mhm.
also, when this is over and you're taking a family photo and you snap at your mom and you see what it can do to her. Let's talk about the fight that you had before you deployed the first time, what you told your dad, and how it kind of haunted you that whole deployment.
Yeah, because going back to what I said, I looked up to him, and he was a very my dad's a very vocal man, and if he has his mindset on something, he goes at it, and like he's a freight train basically. And I had the sense of like I'm a Marine behind me when when I was getting ready to go to combat, and he was saying, you know, you need to go to bed, and your friends need to leave. And I was just had my ignorant, you know, 19-year-old attitude of like, no, fuck you, dad, go to bed. You know, even though it's his house, um, you know, my friends are at his house, everyone's at his house, and he's asking me to ask my friends to leave. I had a chip on my shoulder, and you know, and I think it was having been, I guess, like reflecting on it right now, respecting him to a point where I would never question him or never do anything else like that. Growing up, when I came back from the Marine Corps and had earned the title Marine, and felt like I was now like a man in the sense of, you know, whatever that would mean. It's like now I can tell him what I feel, and not looking at what the big picture is, which is it's his house, it's his, you know, he's going to work the next day. You know, I'm just an ignorant 19-year-old, no different than, you know, any other 19-year-old to do something stupid coming back from college. So I was definitely pushing the pushing buttons and seeing how far I could go with my attitude, I guess. And the only difference was that I didn't care because I was going to war, you know.
So let
Um,
me ask you, do you think you were his equal? Not now, but at that time, did you think you were his equal then?
oh, I probably did. I probably felt like, oh, I'm a Marine, he's a Marine, you know, I'm going to war, he's an infantry Marine. He went he had experienced combat for a very short time, and I'm like, well, I'm gonna go for 7 months, so like, fuck it, you know. And I probably did, you know, but you know, again, ignorant, and you know, yeah, I guess that might have been the case. I don't know. I can't remember what I was thinking, you know, but that would make sense for why I acted that way.
So your friends and family, you talk about it in the book. They told you before you ever went over there, kill them for God. How do you think that that changed your mindset? Because I have a feeling that your dad didn't push that kind of agenda, nor did your mom. I think that was people around. I could be wrong, but that's what I took from the book. And
I'm
I
glad.
want to kind of know how it changed your mindset, whether it was kind of an encouragement for you or now it's a burden because now you have a certain level to uphold.
Yeah. So I'm glad, number one, that it came off that way. That my parents weren't the ones that were pushing that. And like growing up, I deer hunted with my dad and bird hunted, and I'd want to go shoot targets at times. And I remember I wanted to buy a Bin Laden target. And this is like in 2001 or 2002. And he's like, don't, no, he's like, we don't shoot at targets with people on them. And I was like, okay, you know, didn't think much of it at the time. But then fast forward to going, they never ever said that, you know, they just said, you know, be smart, trust your gut, trust your training. And of course my mom's like, come home safe, you know, like every mom would say. But the people around me were definitely, you know, especially my high school peers, because they were still in high school, or just graduating, and we're saying what you would say, and that definitely had both of it. It was a burden because I felt like I had to produce. You know, I'm an infantry Marine going to combat. Like I better do infantry Marine things. And yeah, and it did weigh on me because it was like, okay, I'm a man of my word. And if I say, okay, I'll do that, then well, I probably should do that. Right. So
Right. Well, I almost wonder though, if looking back at it, your dad is at the age you're at now when he's telling you this, or pretty close to it, when
pretty
he's
close.
telling you
Yeah.
this kind of stuff. And I'm almost wondering if it's kind of the same thing that with that, that wisdom and those years of experience to think back on it, he had taken lives in Vietnam and knew the weight that they bared on your soul way after you did it. And unless someone's done that, they can never know exactly what you're going through. So do you think that that was part of it, that it was just that wisdom of knowing that burden that's going to follow you back?
I think so. I think, and to clarify, my dad wasn't in Vietnam. He was in. There's an incident called the Maya Gez incident that happened at the tail end of Vietnam, and if you look it up, it's actually quite fascinating. There's not a lot of information out there about it, but it's there, and they actually have like a foundation or a association of Marines that were and other members that were a part of that. But so he experienced, from what he's told me, basically a day of combat, and then that was it. And from that, yes, I do believe he. I mean, you only need one day of combat to know really how shitty it is, and
I
at
say
the end of the
1 minute
day,
of combat.
1 minute, yeah, yep. It's different when it's interesting because they had lost a lot of Marines in that incident, and I feel like it's combat is cool until you start taking losses, and that's when it sucks because everyone wants to be on the winning side, and when you're moving the ball, if you want to do it, you know, that kind of analogy, if you're moving the ball, everything's going great. When that ball gets taken away, then it's not fun anymore, and so yeah, I definitely think that he was wisely aware of what I was getting into, and I was just ignorant and full of piss and vinegar, and ready to go do all the put all my training to use. So
I want you. We're going to talk about your combat, and when you get into there, when you arrive in country, you're there to do it. I ask almost every single guest this: sight, sounds, smells of when you arrive in country. You are now a Marine. You are now doing the job that you've been training to do. How are you feeling? Can you walk me through it?
I was excited. I mean, I was like on the whole, like generally how I was feeling is I had a upper respiratory illness, and so I felt like, well, I didn't think about having a cold going to combat. This sucks, so it was inconvenient. I was tired before even getting there, just from travel and then being sick. But yeah, the air was very dry. It felt like a different planet. And I think I compared it to like Mars in the book, or like just this weird landscape of nothing. And so it was very eerie. And and I think Dagan asked me this at one point or talked about it, but it was interesting. Like I didn't really feel uncomfortable until I started seeing the senior Marines that had been to OIF 1 in the initial invasion, and then into Fallujah in 2004, when they started when they started being really quiet and being a lot more serious. That's when my hair started standing up of like, okay, now it's time to keep an eye out for whatever it is we're supposed to be looking for, because it was a massive city, and I think that was one of the things that was surprising to me is I didn't expect it to be as big of a city as it was. um there's danger areas every direction, so someone would shoot at you from anywhere, and it's really just your luck as to whether you're or not you're someone that gets hit by something. So the sights and smells, it was a dirty, a big dirty city. The terrorists had blown the or destroyed the sewers, and so they'd overflow every night, and there'd be this like black sludge that filled the streets in the mornings, and it wouldn't go away till mid morning or early afternoon there, and it was just smelled terrible. So
So I like the way that you compare it when you talk about Mars and stuff, because to me, you're from Wisconsin. I'm guessing you hadn't really been to a lot of places before you joined the Marines. So it might as
no.
well been on Mars. I mean, you're halfway around the world. You might as well have been on the planet Mars because it's so foreign to you. But
Yep.
being so foreign to you, when you get over there, it's almost got to be surreal to where it doesn't, you can't even comprehend it. Would that be a correct assumption of how you felt?
Yeah, I came from a Midwest Wisconsin, and it's like I think there was one black family in our community. Everyone else is white kids, and so outside of having like language barriers and everything, I came from a very lush and thriving area with like both vegetation and people, and so going to extreme poverty and a place where no one, the customs are different. You can't teach that until you're there, really. And it was like being on a different planet.
So, as you move over there and you start to go into it, the book jumps into it relatively quickly about some of the behaviors starting to poke their heads out. And I
Mhm.
kind of want to understand the psychology behind. We all get it. You were 19 years old. You're a kid. That's what kids do. But very early on in the book, it seems like there is a hatred for no reason of the people that live in that country.
Yeah, and I felt that that kind of played into what you asked before with, you know, coming from a very Christian area and having we're still on the tail end of September 11 attacks. Our enemy was, you know, extremists, Muslim extremists. So it felt like, oh well, everyone that I've been here with was in Fallujah, and they're talking about how it's just nonstop combat and no one likes us. They hate us, and so I'm like, why would I think anything different? Especially hearing it from guys that were there only like a year prior and in heavy combat. I didn't trust anyone. Like I said in the book leading up to it, we never really did any training on like shaking hands and kissing babies. It was all like kill, kill, kill. And which is what Marines should do. And I want to make it clear. I think at times I've been on some of the podcasts and I worry that I'm coming off as not supporting what the Marine Corps mission is, but we also can't be putting Marines with that mission in positions where it's more of a military police mission. That's a different job. That's why they have military police versus infantry. And so that we were in that weird crossover and our mindset was just kill, kill, kill. And it's easier to kill people, at least from my experience with that, when you dehumanize them. Um, and so treating them like they're nothing, it's just like, okay, well, you know, they're less than us. So we're there to do the United States Marine Corps things and we're going to win, you know?
Well, do you think though that when you think that way and you talk about not learning how to shake hands and all that kind of stuff, if you could, hypothetically, do you think your career and your time in the Marine Corps is different if that would have been taught to you? Not as equally as kill, 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 because I think the first one is probably the most important in combat. But do
Yeah.
you think that it changes your mindset a little better if you go through training, or because you're so young, it's going to bounce right off you and you're just going to do Marine Corps things?
I think that we were in a weird, like our unit in that time period was a very weird time to be. It was almost like a transition in the war from, direct action or like offensive to defensive in a sense. And no one really knew, I think, how to do it the right way. And I look at my deployment to Afghanistan where same mission, a similar mission. We're going to Helmand province. We're going to hand out, but we knew up ahead of time we're going to be handing out, you know, rice and beans and clothes and stuff. And then we're also going to find where the enemy are. And I think going there, I made sure that the Marines and I know some of the Marines that I've served with and we've talked about it, that I made it clear that we're there to do a dual mission set where a lot of my senior Marines and a lot of people leading up to Ramadi were like, hey, 2-4 got really fucked up there. And so did 2-5. We're going to go there. We have to kill everyone and just not let anyone get in the way so we can all come home. And so there was a lot of fear. I think it was a fear driven culture over like a mission driven, if that makes sense. And I think that mindset played into it from both, senior lance corporals on up um, for Ramadi.
I think it makes sense, but I would almost, if I could, disagree with you about something. When you go to Afghanistan, one, you're a more seasoned soldier. One, you're with a different kind of unit completely who
Yep.
has that dual mission, who has that stuff taught to them that just like Green Berets are taught, yes, you are there to lay waste to what you need to, but you're also there to help build. And I really think that you talk about it when you're talking about Iraq of winning the hearts and minds and the things that you did to not win the hearts and minds, that when you go to Afghanistan, it's a completely different outlook for you.
Yeah, definitely. And I agree with that 100%. If that didn't come out clear earlier, I definitely had a different mindset. And I definitely had a mindset of I don't want the Marines that are serving with me or under me to ever have to deal with the things that I was dealing with from the Ramadi deployment, like the second guessing and all that. Um, so it's just a different, yeah, it was just a completely different mindset that I went there personally with. And a lot of us were. I mean, it wasn't. It was a weird time to be in Ramadi. Like it, we didn't really have a mission. We'd look for high value targets here and there, but then we were like, well, what are we supposed to be doing? We're just getting constantly blown up and shot at. And but there's not, like, the enemy's a bunch of cowards and running, and then we meet the people and they say there's no bad guys in Ramadi. And so we were just at a loss for really what we were doing there. And the mindset of all of us, a lot of us at 19, 20, 21, um, you know, we made just decisions that 19, 20, 21 year olds make, you know. But we just had guns and the backing of the US government um with it, you know.
Right. Well, the question that I have from that though is when you talk about the Marines that worked underneath you, you didn't want them to have to deal with the second guessing and stuff like that. And I want to kind of pose an adversarial question to you is
Yeah.
don't you think that a lot of that stuff that you're talking about, the second guessing, the we can get into the incident where your buddy got his shoulder hurt because of something you did, but most of that stuff was self-inflicted. It wasn't from the government. It wasn't from your superiors. You self-inflicted a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, no, and that's what I'm saying. I was a 19-year-old, you know, kid, still doing 19-year-old kid things. Um, with like a false sense of confidence from uh yeah, just being around a bunch of guys who are like-minded. So you know, we were playing around with the shoulder thing, and that happened. I never would have thought that, you know, oh shit, guys might get killed coming out to medevac this guy, you know. None of us did. That's why we were all doing it. It wasn't the first time that anyone messed around like that. It's just the first time one of us got hurt, and of course, I'm the one that did it. You know. But yeah, I don't by any means put any of the things I did out as like the Marine Corps' fault or even my command or anything. It was my 19-year-old brain. You know. Um, and especially a lot of it started coming out after, like, we started taking losses. It was like, well, fuck these people. They're sitting here telling me that there's no bad guys here and my friends just got killed like a day before, you know? And so it was that, you know, there was no really talking it through. It's just kind of like everyone starts getting messed up or killed, and like we all just sit around the smoke pit and agree that we just need to do more damage. Like they just need to fear us more. That's the problem.
Okay. So then let's fast forward to Afghanistan again. When you have people underneath you and you're trying to take them down a different road or teach them a different way than what you had to deal with, it's still like-minded individuals. So how do you
Mhm.
change that landscape in their minds that that's the wrong way to think of it? This is the right way. Because like you
There
said,
was
even though it's MARSOC, you're going to have some, a little older guys and stuff. They're still very intent on being Marines.
Oh yeah, and there was still issues with other, you know, with people and everything. But at least the people that were directly with me, the difference was this: is that I wouldn't let any of the talk of like just fucking kill everyone or like, you know, just shoot, you know, there'd be talk people like um gaming what would you do in this scenario. And if people started getting out of control with how they were talking about how they would respond to something, I would nip in the bud right there and be like, no, we're not doing that. um don't don't pregame it, don't fucking put it out there, you just address the situation as it comes to you. Yes, we're going to shoot it out if we have to, but it wasn't just like this blanketed statement. Kind of going back to what I was getting from some of the people from my peer group back home, which was like, go kill them, fuck them all up. And so I have that backing going into it, and then seeing that some of the Marines that I was with in Ramadi, having been in Fallujah and OIF 1, were just like, we just got to kill them and then we'll get home safe, you know? And so it was a different mindset from the perspective of the influence from Marines who had been to combat before, because there is um, a lot of respect that gets you know, put with people that had been to combat, especially like as a junior Marine, listening to what they have to say, you don't really second guess it. It's like, well, this guy went to combat and came back, so I'm just going to do what he does. And some of them had very terrible bits of advice, but that at the end of the day, I'm not putting that on anyone but me for how I behaved there. But it's just a reality of what the situation was, which was there was a different mindset going to Ramadi.
You think you run the risk, though, of guys maybe that don't know you because it was a relatively new unit in Afghanistan. You run the risk of guys going, this guy's a pussy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's always trying to get. Do you think you ever run that risk? Or did you ever, I guess, from reading your book and kind of looking how you thought internally, did that ever cross your mind?
I don't think it did at the time because I was so of what the circumstances were for some of those decisions. Like a lot of the guys, like coming from recon or coming from force, I mean, they do cool missions and stuff, but they don't have the same amount of day-to-day combat that a lot of the line companies deal with, and they don't necessarily see a lot of the same casualties and a lot of the same things because they are so quick in and out. And the interesting thing about MARSOC was a lot of the guys that were the old force guys, the old recon guys, I say like sergeants and above, got along great, never had any like concerns with that stuff. A lot of them were the younger like recon guys that maybe hadn't had a deployment, or if they did, it wasn't a combat one, and it was just kind of that mentality, that attitude, um, of like we're just going to go there and do whatever we want. And I just can't control what other people are going to do, and I never would really. I never had them in my platoon. My platoon was all former line company or like very junior Marines, and so I didn't deal with that, and I didn't really have concerns for it. I was just very confident with what I knew was right for that time.
All right, you wrote, we turned into monsters. The civilians of Ramadi paid for it. To them, I am sorry. Do you feel the civilian cost overshadows the mission?
Oh, totally. Like there was, I don't know. The mission was winning hearts and minds at the end of the day. And at the beginning it was finding WMDs, right? And that wasn't ever what I was a part of. But when we let a war go on for that long, the civilians are the ones who ultimately pay in the long run. And it's like they're the ones that have to live around everything happening and live around people coming from Syria or other places to come shoot at the Marines. And it just so happens they're on their rooftop. And so, we attack that building. So I don't think that there's any war at in the end of the day that goes as long as it did, where the civilians aren't more impacted than what the end goal of the mission would be, which in Iraq, I think anyone, as we're all looking at it now, and having been on this 20-year reunion that we just came off of, we were all just like, what the hell were we doing there? So
Do you have any idea? Anyone have a reason that they thought you were there?
no, no one could give, even officers and on down, no one said like, this is why we were there. So
Looking back on that now, 20 years later, I guess would even more now don't know what you were doing over there. Does it taint that part of your life a little bit then?
I'm sorry, you broke up at the very last part. What did you ask?
Yeah. So when you look back on that and you see at that 20-year reunion that no one knows why you were there, and the changes that you've gone through and how you look at the war now, do you think that taints that part of your life, that darkens it up even more because there wasn't a mission?
I don't think it darkens it. I think for a period of time it did. When I was in that, like, what the hell were we doing? The realization of what did we do there? But I joined the Marine Corps to serve my country. And at the time, that is what the politicians felt we needed to be doing. And so we were there, and I was serving as a Marine, infantryman in combat. And but looking back on it now, I would say what it does more than anything is want me to caution politicians with war in general. Just like, if you're going to send kids out to go do war, they they need to have better backing than just kind of like, you know, especially Marines. You know, that's my experience as Marines, right? Army, send them out there. They're a lot more of a, like a static force, whereas the Marine Corps has always been, at least when I was there, like, we're going to go there, we're going to pave the way to allow, people to come behind us and clean up and make things better. But they just constantly kept rotating Marines through there, and we just kept becoming fodder for, what I, after reading a bunch of books on like GWAT, it's like, well, all we really did was to help like mitigate Sunni Shia relationship to try to pass that ball to them, and they still didn't do well with it with ISIS. So, um, you know, a long way of saying I don't know. I think that I think at the end of the day, my goal with this is to caution politicians to put us in a position like that again. Like, if we're gonna go do war, we have to go do it very brutal and quick and just be done. And it has to be a set, clear mission set for us. Otherwise, you're gonna leave a lot of people who partake in that wondering what the purpose was and bitter.
Do you think they really care, though?
I don't know. I mean, I think we need to have more politicians that have been in combat in the seats to be able to make those decisions, but that'll never happen either. I wish it would, but I don't think it would. There are too many things at play, and that's just the reality of it. And I think one thing that has come up a number of times in the podcasts I've done are, I'm like, kind of, what was that turning point for me with wondering everything, like with what we were doing. And that was when I had that questionable killing of that man. And then I got, I don't know if it was an inquiry or investigation, whatever the right word is for that. But I got questioned by our judge advocate general officer. And that was the first time I felt like, okay, I did everything that we were allowed to do, supposed to do. The man was in our wire. We were authorized to kill anyone in the wire. And I did that. And now I'm getting questioned for it. And so now I'm like, well, why do I have this happening? Now, why am I even here? Why are we here if I'm like doing my job and now I'm going to get looked at for it? Now I don't want to do it, And it was just extremely confusing. And I think that's a good way to look at the entire war.
I think it is, but once again, I got to ask you about the self-inflicting of it. Do you think it was what you did or how you went about it to do it?
Both. I mean, at the end of the day, and I talk about it in the book, I didn't know there were so many confusing things that could have happened and that could have led up to him being there. And I didn't know what to do, but I knew that I could shoot him and then that would end any threat that could exist. And so that's what I chose to do. Now, I don't know, you look at that and in hindsight, it's like, well, he didn't have a gun on him. He didn't have a button pushing anything. So, but what if he did? And I didn't make that decision? That would have destroyed me probably even more if someone would have got injured, And so it's like putting those scenarios in front of people when it's such a uncertain scenario. It was just very confusing. And so I don't know what the right answer would be. You know, at the end of the day, I've come to terms with the decision that was made. It happened. I can't take it back, So
Do you think that
I don't know if
your hatred? No, I think you answered it great, but I almost want to ask you, because so much emotion when you're reading this book and it really comes out in the writing. Do you think your hatred fueled that decision more that day
oh,
than any other part of the decision? Like you said, well, he could have been a bad guy. Someone could have gotten hurt and I would have felt bad about that. But I want to ask you, do you think your hatred fueled it even more than any of those other circumstances?
I don't know if I could say any of the other ones, but I know that that's of course, that's something that was a factor in it. You know, I mean, we all had a similar mindset, and yeah, I mean, I don't know that I look back and say, "Oh, I hated that man. That's why I shot him." But I know that those emotions that were in the text were almost ever present. You know, and so it was like, there's plenty of signage. What the fuck's this guy doing? You know, did he drop something that I can't see because I couldn't see where he came in? And it was just like, it made it. I'd say this, that the hatred that I carried and that a lot of us carried in general for our enemy played a role in a lot of the decisions that were made.
The reason I ask you is because in the writing, when you write it, you almost seem to second guess your decision right as you see him put his hand on the wall. And believe me, I'm not saying you're right or wrong or anything like that, but you could feel it in the writing that you almost felt guilty about it when you did it.
I felt guilty about not killing him right away and having him like look at me. You know, it was like, not that he looked at me, but it was like I didn't do a good Marine job and I didn't kill him on the first burst. You know, so I felt like wounding an animal in a sense, not comparing him to an animal. I mean, I'm comparing him to an animal, but the similar feeling of like, that's the only other thing I have to compare to is like, I want to, if I'm going to make that decision, I want it to be clean and done and not to have the suffering. And I felt like it was kind of like he looked at me like, what the fuck? And at that point, I was like, shit, like there's a human being, you know, looking at me that I didn't kill, that I now have just wounded, which it was just a different feeling. It's not something that you're trained to do. You know, when you do your
Of
training for
course.
shooting targets, they go down. You know, they don't writhe in pain and they don't look at you and have that very intimate moment. You know, that human moment, regardless of how
Yeah.
much hatred could be behind anything. It's a very human moment. And from my experience, killing people from afar is much easier than killing them close up. And I think a lot of people agree with that for that reason.
The reason I ask you, and I ask you in that way, was because I almost think when you talk about it and, when your eyes locked onto each other, you said it, I can't remember, it burned into your memory or whatever.
Yeah.
But I almost
Yep.
think it threw you back to being raised by your dad and him teaching you, we don't shoot at targets with people on them. We don't just wound animals when you're hunting. I think all of that, even in all of that craziness around you, some of that humanity is trying to kick the door in and come back in.
Yeah. And I would agree with that. There's like a moment there. And I'm a spiritual person. I'm not religious, but I do believe in energy and like, energy can't be created or destroyed. Right. And so it's almost like reflecting on that over the years is that like there was an energy transferred in a sense in that moment. And and that's just what happened, and it brought me back. I think you hit the nail on the head that it does go back to some of that. Yeah, the like being raised to be clean about everything. So
All right. I brought up the quote that we turn into monsters. There's a lot of things, and we don't need to get into them all, but a lot of the things that you talk about, I want to bring up a couple of the instances that you talk
yeah,
about in the book. One was where you were in a house, clearing a house. You go into, I guess, the master bedroom or a bedroom, and you pee all over this guy's bed for
yeah,
not really any reason. And another Marine even asked you, like, what the hell are you doing, man? We're in the middle of something, and you're very nonchalant about it. You also talk about when there was a guy that used to walk by and you hated him so bad that you would flip him off and tell him fuck you every time he would walk by, even though there wasn't really anything going on. And there's many other times where you really kind of shed your shield off you and really take that on. Which one of the things in the book do you think still to this day haunt you?
I mean, other than the man we just talked about that I shot, because
Other
that's
than
probably the
that,
one. Yeah,
yeah, other than that, because I think that there was a lot of duality going on in that situation. I'm talking strictly where, like the incident with the bed, where you're straight up wrong for however you're feeling, and I think you realize that when it's all said and done, that you were wrong in every way that you look at it. That's the kind of instances that I'm talking about, not the one where we can play a duality of it could be right, it could be wrong.
Yeah. I think it was probably the bed one. And it's funny because my buddy that was in 2-4 in Ramadi before us, so he was the first. They were the first Marines in it. He just finished reading that part of the book, and he was like, man, I just wanted to smack you, but then like the way you talked about it, it's like, the mindset there and everything, and I think that's the one that I'm most disappointed. The one that I'm most disappointed in, because it's like we've already taken, these people already have nothing, and we were taking even more at that point from them in that instance. And yeah, it was just it was like I don't even know why. It's just like autopilot, not thinking, just doing. And it didn't make sense. It was like, I don't care, you know? And the interesting thing is the Marine that walked by, he wasn't like, what the hell are you doing? He was like, hey, what are you doing, man? And I'm like, taking a piss. He's like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to go up to the roof. And it was just that casual of a conversation. It wasn't like, why are you fucking doing that? It was just kind of like, you know, I'm not going to say, I'm not the only one to have done stuff like that in country. And it's just the way it was, and it's sad.
Well,
Um,
I think though
but
that, to interrupt you for a second, I think that it needs to be pointed out though, unless someone has been in that situation where you're constantly put into that role every single day, 24 hours a day. And I talk about this with law enforcement, with first responders and stuff that have to deal with it on a constant basis. They don't understand the level of emotion that can go into the decisions that we make, of just seeing something over and over again, and you're just fucking tired of seeing it.
I'll say one thing on that, and you brought up law enforcement, and this is going to be a hot topic possibly. I'm not trying to be controversial, but when I first saw Derek Chauvin kneeling, the first video I ever saw on that, I'm like, that man is fucking burned out. And that's the only thing I thought. And that translates, I think, not necessarily to, I'm not making it okay or not making it okay. I'm just saying there is a point at which I think your brain, it can't process anymore. And the danger, having been a firefighter, a career firefighter, and dealing with law enforcement on calls and everything, and seeing it in ourselves with fire, is with that career field, we live to the retirement, right? So you have to make it to retirement, otherwise you lose all these benefits, which I think is not doing a service to a lot of the people who get burned out, and then the citizens that they serve, because it's like you're putting people in a position where they have to continue working to make their life and their time that they've given worth it. But also, there's not enough mental health resources, and there's not enough other resources for them necessarily to do it to the quality or to the standard that needs to be met. So that's all I'll say on that. Bringing it back to the Marine Corps, I think that culture or that mindset needs to be talked about and addressed, because it is a reality. We're dealing with human beings. We are all human, and we're able to change and have different scenarios that affect us in a way, or even just a culture that affects us in a way, um, that we may not see the little changes that end up to a big change or a big event. I wouldn't have walked into Ramadi and peed on someone's bed the first day, the first week, the first month. It was a compounding of things that happened that led us to dehumanize, you know, some of our enemy. And it goes back to what we talked about. It's easier to kill people when you dehumanize them. So
Well, I'm so glad that you ended your statement that way, because it's the perfect segue into the next thing that I was going to ask you was, when do you think that you sensed your innocence being stripped away, and the dehumanizing starting to happen. Can you look back on it and say there's a flashpoint, or do you think it was just a like a cumulative effect?
I think it was a cumulative effect. I want to say that like when Marty and Cadan died, that was kind of was kind of the boiling over of it, you know, and and then it just continued from there on. So we started losing more people, and yeah, they would just like fight us like cowards in Ramadi. You know, we wouldn't really. I mean, we'd shoot them up here and there, and find some, but a lot of them would just pull the trigger and run, which was different from my experience in Afghanistan. You know, I had a lot more respect for the Taliban, um, and that was a completely different mindset there. You know, because it was they were willing to fight. But Ramadi, it was frustrating fighting cowards.
What do you think made it? I want you to walk me through, because you've lost more than just these guys. You started taking on casualties and stuff, and you've seen it over your career that you had in the military. But walk me through why it was so important about the guys that you mentioned by name, because not only are you mentioning them by name right now, you talk about it in the book and you bring it up multiple times more than anybody else that you talk about. What made that bond so different with them?
Well, they were my team. Like I spent every moment with them basically in the training up to leaving, everything. You know, we slept together, we ate together. You know, it's like being in a neighborhood. The military is like being in a neighborhood. You know your family best in the same house, and when your neighbor gets killed, it's like that sucks, but it's not the same as having someone that lives under the same roof. You know, it's a different experience because you know them more intimately. So that's why it was a lot harder, you know, a lot harder on me. And I was also in the same vehicle with them when he got blown up, you know, 2 nights in a row. So
Can we go into that? Because I want to talk about that, because there has to be just an unreal mental effect that happens in your brain when you're going down a route, you get blown up, and less than 24 hours later, you mention it that you guys are tensing up because you know you're getting to the point where you got blown up the night before, and it happens again. You got to talk to me about what that does to you, because I can see it happening once and then you pass over it the next day and it doesn't happen. You pass over it the next day and it doesn't happen, and it kind of goes away. But the exact opposite happened. You go there the next day and it's even more catastrophic than the night before.
yeah, it sucks. I mean, there's that leads up to all the stressors, all the changes, those little events, and they're not little events; those are big events. But you know, it's the constantly wondering when your time is coming, not if it's coming. And it's like, how am I going to go? You hear about guys, you know, burning alive in their Humvee because it flips over, and you're like, oh God, I hope I don't go like that. Um, I hope it's just quick. Um, and then you like get blown up, and in that April 20th one that killed my friends. It's like you wake up from a nightmare. You just feel like it's like I was out. I experienced death as close as I could come because it didn't feel anything. It just went out, but then I woke up and it was like, I just remember thinking like, this is a fucking nightmare. So,
Can we talk about those emotions as you wake up? Because it did almost knock you out like instantly, and you come to, and there's just utter chaos around you. So, can you walk us through that incident on the second night?
I mean, it was it was the second day. It was 11 o'clock or 1300. So it was afternoon. But yeah, I mean, just came to, and, I remember thinking like this would be a good spot to put this IED. And then we passed through it, and it was just like it was just like white and then nothing, I didn't hear anything, feel anything. And then I woke up and felt my leg on fire because I had a piece of shrapnel on my left leg. And that's kind of that's what woke me up. I was the first one up in the back. And then, yeah, it was just everyone was fucked up. I thought I was the only one that lived because no one else was moving, for a while. And I was just like, the best way to describe it is just feeling like you're completely wasted, just like drunk out of your mind. And like, nothing works, your hands don't work. You can just kind of like, I just imagined how I looked. It was probably my mouth just like wide open agape and just like, just looking around, trying to like let the processor catch up, you know? So, and that's when I realized my friends were hit, and yeah, I couldn't even get the words out of when my other buddy in the back, Tager, who got hit in the ass, when he didn't realize it yet, but I was like trying to get his attention. I couldn't get the words out. All I could say was get my fucking, and I was just pointing, like trying to get my med kit. I'm just like, get my fucking, that's all I could do. But I don't want to talk about it anymore. So I'm getting, but, but yeah, it was, it was the most frustrating feeling because you feel so helpless and you realize that like shit just got real.
You, so I have to ask you not about that incident, but that's the moment that it all became real. It wasn't any other time before that you thought like, you know, is it just because death was so close right then, or
I don't know. I think probably a mixture of it all. Just the like. Here's the thing people don't realize when they go to combat. They're like, "Oh, I'm going to do all these things, and I'll fucking, I'll never get caught. I'll never get captured. I'll carry one round with me that I always have just in case, and I can shoot
right,
myself, right?"
right,
And it's like, well, when you get fucking blown up, you don't have a choice in any of that. And had it been a different scenario, a different location, we could have gotten blown up, and the next thing you know, I could have woken up and had myself in an orange jumpsuit because I was unconscious and had no choice as to what anyone would do, you know? And it's a very vulnerable position to be in because you don't have that choice. You don't have like I've been under fire, like heavy machine gun fire, where it's like I'm gonna make the choice to fucking run to that next piece of cover. And that's my choice. And I know there's bullets coming and I'm gonna run, but I'm gonna make it because that's the way I fucking just have that feeling, right? I'm gonna make it there. But when you get blown up, you don't have those decisions. You have no choice. It's all in God's hands. And and it's a very makes you feel very small because that's what we are. I mean, we're just tissue and water, you know? When you look at it from like a high level, it's like how are we any different than a bug that hits our windshield going 75, you know? We're not, we're just as vulnerable. It's just a different mechanism. And so I think that realization at 19 was a foundation for my life at that point.
so from your answer that you just said and saying that you don't want to talk about that anymore, I've got to ask you, do you think survivor's guilt ever goes away, or do you just think it takes another form?
Um, it never goes away. I don't think. I get choked up when I even think about it right now. But at the beginning, no, it's at the end of I'm gonna get choked up, but the end of Saving Private Ryan, when he says, James earned this, you know, you do your best to make life into something. So
It's a lot to
because I
ask a
don't want,
19-year-old.
yeah, it is. I'm 39 now and I'm still it's not all okay. But you get here's what you get good at is making it okay for the time it needs to be. And that's what I got really good at over the years is being able to put it away where it needs to be. And then I noticed that it doesn't become real until people start really digging into the emotion end of it. Because I can talk about the event on the high level, but I think a part of that too with the book is like I don't like talking about it very much, but I wanted it to be out there. And so writing about it, it allowed me to be like, here's what happened. Like, let's just leave it be. Um, but obviously I'm doing podcasts and stuff and talking about him. It just, it's just a heavy subject, so.
Well, I almost wonder though, when you say you're talking about making a life worth living and everything, by you talking about it and being forced to talk about it, don't you think that's making the life? Because those guys will never get to tell their story. They'll never
Yeah,
get to write a book about it. Their family can't even really write a book about it. They know what happened, but you were there. So don't you think though, being uncomfortable about that at some point will become comfortable? You'll be comfortable being uncomfortable talking about it because you are their voice.
yep, and I think that's why I'm here right now talking about it. No one likes to show weakness. I don't like to tear up. Um, but at the same time, it's like, how fortunate am I to even be doing that? I am here, you know, and I do owe it to them, and that's why, like in the book too, I think there's like 17 names I talk about, total. There's a number of them, a number of guys, Poppy, Young, Mark Albert, all these guys that it was very important that I told their story as well, because I looked at them as brothers, and the reason that I came home, we were fighting alongside of each other, and so being able to share that and have them sign off on their names to be in the book was a big deal for me too. And yeah, I just hope that the book, and I from the feedback I've been getting, has been, a lot of people have been surprised at the stuff I've put in there, but it's like, that's what it was. Like, why would I sugarcoat it? That's the reality of what the war was, at least in that time period.
I want to mention someone you talk about the 17 names. You talk about one staff sergeant in particular in the book, and I thought it was pretty interesting of how you did it, because it's one of those, again, dichotomies about you where you never liked this guy. You stayed away from him. He was always angry. He was always stressed out. He comes to get your buddy after the shoulder incident happens to medevac, and he tells you right then, you better fucking make sure nothing happens to us getting back, or you're going to have, hell to pay on the backside of it. And then
Yeah,
as he walks away and he goes back and they make it back safe and nothing happens, you go, now I see why he was so stressed out all the time, why he was the kind of person he was. Why do you think those blinders were on for so long? You were living in it. You
because I
had lost
wasn't
people.
because I never was a person that had to bear the weight at that time of being responsible for people's well-being. I didn't have Marines to be in charge of at the time. And I think just coming with age, you start looking outside of yourself, right? As a young man, um, you do stupid things, like, not me personally, but you do burnouts, you drink and drive, you do stupid shit that you would never do, excuse me, as a grown man. And it's like a learning thing. It's just that we did that. A lot of us did that overseas. And so it was just different experiences. And I think having children has changed my mindset, obviously. And just given me a little bit more patience with some of the people that I had to deal with in the Marine Corps, and understand where they were maybe coming from. I was just another 19-year-old idiot, that made a poor decision, and now this guy had to risk 30 of his men to come pick up one of ours. Like, of course I'd be mad if I were in his shoes. You know,
So how do you think that changed when you go over to Afghanistan and you actually have people under your command? Then do you take those lessons learned and put them in every day, or do you stay away from the I'm always angry, I'm always stressed out, and you took maybe your dad's approach?
yeah, I never was. I don't think I was ever an angry guy. I think a lot of people that would reflect, or like say that they knew me in Afghanistan or at any point, would say I was always smiling. Even in Ramadi, yeah. And not always, but, like, more often than not, I was the one that was trying to make the best of it, and that was coming from my mom and dad's end of things. Um, and my dad, he would yell and stuff growing up, and I never really cared for that, like a lot of the yelling. And so I was like, okay, I'd see other Marines, other leaders in the Marine Corps, like Poppy. I talk about him in the book, Danny Santiago. Like, he had a huge influence on me for how I wanted to be as a leader. And I took a lot of his leadership and roll, and put that under my belt, because it was a lot more of guiding and coaching. And like, if you fuck up, it's just matter of fact, here's the consequence. It's on you. And I liked that approach a lot more. And so I really latched onto that.
I think we should also point out something else, that it doesn't really matter if you yelled or anything. You're not a small guy. You're 6'7".
Yeah.
You're a big dude.
Yeah.
And I think that that goes along with it, though, because I know I had a partner at one point he's a mountain of a man. He was my partner, but he, on the backside of it, was the nicest guy in the world,
Yeah.
because he knew if it came to it. Do you think that that was part of your reasoning, and the way you approached leadership was because you knew that you could handle it? There was no question about if you had to go hands on, if you had to get physical, if you had to get loud, you could do it. But you're so big. Do you think that that's already, you've kind of put that in their mind as you're approaching them?
Oh yeah, totally. And my dad growing up, he'd always tell me, like, you're a big guy. There are going to be people that don't like you just because of your size. And he's like, the best thing you can do is walk away. And so I had that, always kind of on the back of me, and is fighting as the last option, and so that's kind of how I went about it, especially with my own Marines. And I saw how much I hated some of the leaders that would yell and just like command or demand their authority, demand their respect. I hated working for them, and a lot of the Marines around hated working for them. And, as much as they'd get the outcome that they wanted, it wasn't in a way that was beneficial for the team. And so just recognizing that, was huge.
Okay, let's talk about when you come home, because you are 100% a different person than the guy who left to go to Iraq.
Yeah.
And even let's go, even though you've matured, Afghanistan, when you're done with Afghanistan, you're a different person. And I want to talk about the kind of mitigating factors that are driving this to happen. We need to talk about the anger. We need to talk about alcohol. But the first question that I want to pose to you about it is, you see the combat deaths, and I want to know which one's harder for you, the combat deaths, or when people come back, the suicides that happen after they get back.
Hmm. That's a good, I've never thought about that. I think the combat deaths, I think the suicides are frustrating. And I was almost a statistic a number of times, and it's just, the combat deaths are harder because that's like, no one says like, I'm going to go to combat. I want to die. The suicides are like, I want to die. And it's sad. It's frustrating because it's like, well, why? Like, you should stay. Maybe we can work something out or whatever the hell. But the combat deaths, it's like, that's a stolen life in a sense. That person wasn't ready. So
Well,
for
let me
me,
ask
that's
you then, suicide attempts. Do you
mhm.
think now that you're looking back, you were ready?
No, because I didn't complete it. You know, I think I would have made sure if I think they were like, I did the pills. I had a gun to my head, which, if I was ready, it would have happened. And then the pills and the liquor, if I wanted to make sure of it, I probably would have just pulled a gun on it. And it was more of like a tempting, I think, of God. And I think I was going through a very questionable time there with that, with like wondering about religion and everything. And yeah, sorry, I feel like I didn't answer that question that you wanted.
No, you did, but the thing that keeps coming up to me when you say you didn't complete it, you did, and of course there were cries for help when you put the gun to your head in front of your wife and she's pleading with you. Those are cries for help, and I get that one to you. But completing, you took the pills, you took the alcohol, And if
Hmm.
you're even saying you're tempting God, you're completing that process.
Yeah.
Just thinking about it is one thing. You did complete the process though. And I almost wonder, now that you look back on it, you say in combat, they're not ready for it. Do you think you were ready for it?
No, I mean, at the end of the day, I think everyone, a lot of people that make that decision are overwhelmed for a period of time. You know, I don't know what that time period is. Um, and I look back on it now and it's like, okay, I obviously had a different purpose to be here. And I'm just kind of going with that at the end of the day. You know, I don't know. I guess I can't say that I was ready for it. I mean, I did the note, did everything, you know, but but it didn't go through. So I don't really think much on it other than the fact that it was like shit that happened. I guess I'm still here for a reason, you know?
I guess the second question that would come off that though, to kind of give a more complete answer, is when those kind of things happen and it doesn't get completed, or that kind of thing doesn't happen. You said people are in a situation, like a very dark time at certain points where it pushes them into that. When you look back on those times now, are they really that dark? Or do you think, man, now that I've been through therapy, now that I've done all these things, that really wasn't anything to be put me in that precarious of a situation?
They were pretty dark times, but I didn't have the right tools that I learned from therapy um, to help mitigate it, right? So I think that, like, as I reflect on it, it was a dark time. There were a lot of dark things surrounding that, and now that I have the tools, I feel comfortable knowing that it's like, okay, I won't get to that point, you know? You know, it's kind of like been through the fire in a sense and know what that what that looks like leading up to it, and I can kind of sense where it's getting to be out of control, you know? So, and then on that, it's like having a good support network of a therapist and everything that I can go to has helped.
When do you think the darkest time was? Where was rock bottom?
Man, I feel like I've had a couple, you know? I feel like it was probably that last attempt, you know? I don't know. It's tough because it feels like both of those times were rock bottom in their own way. And I just hadn't allowed myself to get the help that I needed. And so it's hard to say like the one I had one event that was rock bottom. I feel like it was just like yeah. It was probably, I guess, the second time would have been with the alcohol and the pills would have been the lowest, right? So,
Any similarities in those two rock bottoms, and any differences in them now that you look back on it?
I think the similarities were just obviously not having something to hold on to, like a lack of hope or a lack of purpose, and so, I guess differences. I don't know. I guess there'd be more. I don't know that there is much anything different for differences. The similarities were there was it was you know, during some very standard like stressful times in someone's life, like a move, dealing with a move or a career change, and then just having all the other things underneath it, you know, like all the other combat stressors or, you know, just life events, everything kind of always on the back burner, right?
The reason I ask that is because this question is going to be rough for me to ask, but you had experienced death. You had experienced your buddies dying right next to you. And then you come back and you put a gun to your head in front of your wife where she's pleading, knowing fully well that if you complete this or you go through with it, you know what she's going to feel because you felt it. And
Hmm.
I got to understand why you would do something like that when you know the weight that comes behind that decision.
Because I don't think when you're that close to killing yourself that you care about it what anyone else is going through or what anyone else is going to have to do. It's the most selfish thing you can do. And so I was never thinking about anyone else. And that's a part of the stuff I learned, in therapy and everything. But that never once crossed my mind.
Now that she's been with you forever, now that you've been through therapy, is there shame when you look back on that? Or do you think I just wasn't in the right headspace?
For a while it was shame, but I think, I want to say disappointment more. Yeah. And I guess I'm just like disappointment and I guess that's probably the biggest one. I mean, I don't know if there's anything else really. It's just like I wish I didn't have to put her through that. And that's funny. A lot of people that have read the book have come back to me that know me and my wife, and they're like, "You put her through a lot." And it's like, thanks. The fuck do you want me to do with that? Yeah, I did. Like I didn't think about it at the time. It wasn't what I was thinking about no one but myself because it was a very selfish decision. Any of those. And that's a part of it, is like not letting it get to that point is huge. So yeah, I'm very grateful that she's patient, you know, and supportive. So
The reason I bring up the word shame is because I go back to our conversation earlier. And when you say live a life worth living, and you
mhm.
were not doing that for the longest amount of time, living a life worth living to honor what was given and things like that. So that's why I talk about the shame to it. But I think a lot of it involves the alcohol and other stuff because I feel like when you drank the alcohol, it was just to numb everything. It wasn't to drink,
Mhm.
it wasn't to do anything but be numb.
No, no, it was definitely just a drink to numb it. Yeah, there was no. I mean, we drank. The culture of the Marine Corps is alcohol, obviously. Formed in established in a bar, right? And so like, there's already that culture where I live and where I'm from with my family. Alcohol was always a very big thing, and so I did have to step away from that for a period of time. And now at this point in my life, I can enjoy alcohol, and it's not something that's like I'm using to numb. It's something that I can have socially and enjoy. But for a while there, yeah, it was. And I want to be clear too that I did. It was always on my mind that I needed to live my life in honor of like the guys that we lost. And I think some of the frustrations that came with my life and some of the things were like disappointments where I didn't maybe do as well as I should have on something with a career, or something for family or something where I felt like I failed. And so that weight was was compounded by saying like, well, I'm fucking failing the guys who all died. They would have done better than me. They would have made better decisions. Like, why am I even here? I'm actually doing a disservice now because I'm looking like a shitbag. Um, and it's like, well, I should just remove the problem. And so it would be, periods of time there where it would just build up very quickly. And I was like, well, this is the decision that needs to be made. Um, because I did take a lot of pride and I still do in taking pride in trying to honor those guys and live a life that is, you know, making someone else's better at the end of the day.
We need to continue on with the alcohol because when you first start into this kind of going deep and dark into it, you talk about you just wanted to be at home, you just wanted to drink, eat frozen pizza, play video games with your brother or your brother-in-law. So I got
Yep.
to ask you about that isolation. Does it make you feel safer than connecting with other people when you barricade yourself kind of away like that? And are you taken those connections away because once again, we go back to, well, if I make the connection, I could lose that connection.
No, I think the thing that is tough is when you get out of the military from active duty, you are sent back to your home and there's no one else that's there. Very rarely is there anyone that's there to talk with that understands anything of what you've done or been through. And so you go from literally one day in the barracks, we're all laughing and drinking and having a good time drinking, to now I'm alone, no one gets me, and now I'm being accused of being distant, and I'm being accused of just like not talking about stuff or laughing as much, when in reality I was just doing all those things a week prior with the people I care very much about. And so I think there's very much isolation, and I don't think it was self-induced. It was just the circumstances. I guess it would be self-induced in the sense that I chose not to stay in Southern California and live there, because that's really the only way to have continued the life around a supportive network of people. Going back home, it's like, well, now here's all these things you have to do. You have to go to school. You have to do get a job to pay for your living. And so you're very much just back at it, but now no one understands you. And no one really cares. And that's just the brutal truth of it. And that's fine. But it's funny because I had a conversation with some Marines 2 days ago that are currently serving, and ran into them out in town, and we were talking, and he had been for 10 years, and he's like, I'm afraid to get out because I've heard so many stories of guys struggling just with like life, getting out and just trying to find like a new normal. And he's like, it's just comforting to know I can stay in the Marine Corps and be okay. And I told him, it's like, yeah, that's somewhat true. But at the end of the day, there is an end point regardless. And there's going to be a point, is it 10 years or is it 20 years? Is it 30 years where you're done being around the group of people who understand you best for what you've done for your entire life. And now you do have to figure out what this new life is going to be. And that's a very confusing time, especially when back in 2008, we were just kind of like, the transition to get out of the military was, I think, a one week course as to what options you have, which none of them line up with infantry, you know. And at the time, I remember trying to apply for law enforcement, and they're like, "Well, we don't really want guys who were like shooting everything." And I was like, "All right, what now?" So it was a very lonely and isolating time, and I wouldn't say it was self-induced, other than the fact I chose to move home. You know.
I think the most interesting thing about everything that you just said, though, was when you talk about the people and you say the people that knew me the most, that were the most supportive, I'm not with them anymore. And then I think about everything that your wife did and all the stuff that she put up with. And I think there's your support system. Even if it's just one person, that's the one that has never backed away from you. And it's interesting to me that our brains are so clouded in those moments that we can't look
Yep.
around and see like, this is a support system that's going to be around forever.
Yep. And that's what, and not to discredit or take away anything that she has done, because she has been my rock. And I say it in the book, she's my rock, um, but she wasn't there for the times of combat that were like still heavily being processed. And so I think coming back to your spouse, and then she knew me from, we were 15 and saw me through that entire change. And so then I come home now and I'm living with her full time, and I don't have to report into work, and I don't have to do anything. And now I am a different person, and she's telling me I'm a different person, and I'm still trying to figure out the person I am. And so it was just a recipe for disaster, in a sense of like, of course I don't seem like I'm supporting her very much, because I'm still trying to figure me out. And that's something we talk about heavily in our family now, is like, you can't take care of anyone else until you can take care of yourself. And I think that gets missed a lot with people, when someone's struggling. It's like, well, this person needs to figure out their shit, and I can be there for them, but I can't be there to do it for them. And I can't expect anything else other than, you know, if they can't love themselves, I can't expect anything to be shown towards me. So, um, it's something that we took away from a lot of that. It was a lot of learning that happened between my wife and I during that time. On top of that, then her brother passes away in a car accident, a couple months after I get out. And so there was my rock. And now I have to kind of put everything aside so I can say, okay, now it's my turn to try to be there. Um, and so it was a very chaotic time.
Were you good at it?
I was as good as I could have been with the tools I had, I think. I did the best I could. And I know I floundered. I don't know what she would say about it. I think we were both kind of a shell of people at the time. We didn't have um, the loss of her brother affected both of our families because the kids had grown up together, my brother and her brother. And so it wasn't just like someone off in a different state that my family could at least support. In a sense, it was like everyone was grieving that, and so it was a very um just very dynamic and confusing time. And I think that's when I started doing my therapy, at the VA. And that's when I said, like, I know this is a recipe for disaster. I'm already feeling suicidal, and I can't do that for my wife. And that's when I started like having these thoughts of like, okay, we need to do something different. And I started trying to get help at the VA, and I got into like a weekly meeting, but they wouldn't. I wanted my wife there because we were already dealing with so much at home, and it was like, can she get some help too? And they were like, no, your wife can't get treated. And I was like, well, I need her to be there because I can't come home from these sessions and then feel the way I do when she's looking for some support when I'm at home. And so it ended up being that the doctor that was helping us kind of like said, don't tell anyone, but we're both going to be in the meeting. And we just went through these sessions, and I'm very grateful because now this doctor that was interning at the time is doing family practice through the VA, and kind of started with my wife and I, and um, and it was super helpful for that time period.
I got to ask you, which is harder, being a 19-year-old going into a combat zone or being a grown man who has seen everything that you saw and walking into a therapist's office and laying it all on the table?
Oh yeah, the second part is I'm sure being in law enforcement. The most frustrating thing that I had to overcome, and I tell guys when they want to go get help, once they make that decision, because it is something that has to be a decision that they make, right? I feel like that's the most beneficial for the person, instead of being told they have to go. But like the biggest obstacle that I found overcoming anything was getting it. Number one, getting the gaining the trust of the therapist, and knowing that you can talk about things in a safe place and emote in a way that is not standard for men to do. But then it's like getting it out on the table and then having them look at the clock and say, well, it's time to be done. And like, we'll see you next week. Have fun, processing that. And so it's like, shit, now I just tore this Band-Aid off. I have to look at this festering wound for a week and figure out what I need to do with it until I can come in and address it. But it's like knowing that next week is there is very helpful. So in my experience, that was, after getting over the hump of trusting them, it was then, okay, it's going to be okay. It's going to be shitty and it's going to be tough, but there's going to be someone there to talk to about it the following week. So, yeah.
So I got to ask you then, what do you think that civilians or society in general still misunderstands about veteran trauma?
Well, number one, I've heard this, and so I'll just say it. We don't join the military knowing that we're going to deal with this stuff and say like, oh, like we knew it was going in. You don't know what combat is until you're in it. Hollywood does a good job of recruiting people, um, through movies, because it's definitely not like that. And it's funny because the one movie that hits it probably the closest is The Pacific. And a lot of the people that are civilians that I know, don't like that movie because they're like, well, it's just a little kind of, he seems a little weak. It's like, okay, like that's the reality, of it. You come back and it's not hunky dory, but yeah, I think there's a misunderstanding that people know if you're going to join the military that you know what you're getting into, and you just don't. Um, and that's probably for a good reason. Um, but yeah, and I think people don't understand with veterans that the suicide rate I think is so high, and I write about this in the book. This is my own interpretation of it and my own theory, is because we don't want to be the vet that is playing like the poor me and like be the stereotypical vet. So it's like, well, I'll just kill myself and then not have to bear that burden or put that burden on anyone else. And that's the way I felt, at least, was um, it's like, shit, this is getting really tough. If I ask for help, I'm weak. Or if I show that I'm not able to handle it and somehow I'm weak and I'm not doing it, I'm doing a disservice to the guys I served with. So maybe I should just off myself. And so breaking through that mindset was something that I didn't expect or realize was there.
Well, I got to ask you then, because you write in there, I know people who are one bullet away from ending their life, but we can do
Mhm.
better. So what's better mean to you?
I think it means talking about it. I think talking about what I wrote about, which is the things I could have done better in combat and the way I behaved, um, aren't things I'm proud of. And those are things that I think a lot of people that have been into combat and seen their own transitions there carry and are afraid to talk about because it is very vulnerable. And I feel like, I mean, some of the questions that we've even talked about here are just like, damn, that's deep. Like I didn't expect we'd go there, but we're gonna go there and let's do it. And it's like my mindset there is like a shame, I guess, and that exists there even still for those things. As much as I bring them up, it's not something I'm like it's easy for me to talk about. And so I think those are the things that lead to veteran, led me at least to say like, well, I'm not a good person. I wasn't a good person. I'm not a good person. And it's the self-labeling that kind of led to some of that. I don't know where the question went. I think I went off track there. Sorry.
No, you didn't. But I think we can tag on to
All
the
right.
end of that by saying, which is the best to talk about then? The darkest moments or your victories?
Depends on who's listening, right? I don't think the thing that I've found is I feel like a lot of people don't want to hear or talk about the failures, and it's not just like failures like, oh, we didn't win the war. It's like, no, the failures that go from every level. Those are the things that each of us, especially as in the military, we hold ourselves accountable to. Um, and those are the things that are the most uncomfortable to talk about. Anyone can talk about um, all the things we did in Afghanistan that were fucking badass. Like all the, we killed a lot of Taliban. I threw hand grenades. I fucking, did trench warfare. It was wild. But I don't talk about that shit because, like, yes, that's good for recruitment. No, that's not good for, I think, future warfighters, because I think if we can learn from our mistakes as a society, then we can only be more efficient in how we handle combat in the future. And that's kind of where my mindset is with it. Like, it's not comfortable to talk about, but let's go there. Someone needs to, and I'm just going to do it. I already wrote about it. There's been times in my life where I've done or said things that maybe aren't popular, not only with this stuff, but just in like my career fields and everything. And it's just like, but that's just what needs to be said. And that goes back to what we talked about very first, which was how my father and my mom raised me. Try to do what's right, and I fucked that up in Ramadi at times, and so I'm trying to right those wrongs with the hopes that it can prevent that burden from being on someone else.
I got to tell you, before we get into this last kind of part of the conversation, my favorite quote from the book is when you're talking about the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and you want to thank the government officials, and then you say, "No, I'm just kidding. Fuck you." Best part of the book. It was so funny to
Yeah,
me
thank
how
you.
you wrote that, because I think that in a very simple way, you said what a bunch of people thought, and a bunch of people that put it on the line for 20 years during the GWAT. That's
Yep.
exactly what they're thinking, but you said it.
Yeah. And I'm very proud of that line. And the publisher actually, went to editing, it got all the people who edited it came back with all their comments, and it was funny seeing that comment. And then one of the editors said, "Do we need to have this in there? Are you sure you want this in there?" And then one of the other ones said, "No, leave it in there. That's great. That's his voice." And someone else said, "Well, are we sure? Is it?" And I said, "I really want it in there. It's very important for me because fuck them. They fucked this up. And like I didn't fuck that up. I fucked up what I fucked up, but it wasn't the overall war, you know? And so part of me is just like, yes, some of the things I did led to some of that stuff happening. Like the winning hearts and minds, we didn't do it the best, but we also could have pulled out of there a number of times when it was being done or when it was at a point, and we somehow stayed there. So it's just it was a very important thing for me to have in there.
Well,
And I'm glad it stayed. And the way it's read when Dan Bittner on Audible does it, it's just like, yes.
yeah,
you know,
I loved it. Loved it. It was awesome.
thank you.
I wanted to tell you that. All right. So, kind of wrapping up this whole conversation, I want to know what forgiveness looks like to you. And I want it from a couple different areas. Towards the Ramadi civilians, I want your brothers and yourself.
What does forgiveness look like? Is that what you said?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, okay. So towards the Ramadi civilians, I'd say, well, I'm sorry that, forgiveness looks like hopefully this story being out there and sharing what some of the events that happened to some of the people that were there. Um, Hopefully that's a window, even though it might be a mar on, what we did there. Hopefully that is a window into what they had to bear, what they had to go through. And that, even though it's not talked about much, is enough to at least open a conversation for that. And I know it's happening right now with people in Ukraine, and with what the Russians are doing, and I'm not comparing us to them by any means, but we're also human beings, and we're also capable of similar things with the right foundation and lead up to it. So it's something that we need to discuss. And I think hopefully that through those traumas and the discussions we're having, that I can do somewhat of a justice to bring to light some of that. So that's what I'd say for the Ramadi civilians. For my brothers, I've already had a lot of people give me feedback and say, thank you for sharing it. I hope it continues to bring to light some of the things that happen, both good and bad, because I know some of the guys that I've served with carry some events that happened that are similar to mine, and to know that they're not alone in the feelings that they have. You're not a bad person. You maybe made a bad decision. That doesn't mean your whole being is rotten. And I hope that that can come out of this. And then for myself is making it, I guess allowing myself to be a bit of a punching bag for some of these questions, not just yours, but other people have had, to show that we are human and that we are capable of doing good and bad. And war isn't something that should be taken lightly. And once we make that decision, we need to do it the right way. And so I hope, the forgiveness end on that is being put in a position where I have to talk about this to hopefully make it better, you know, and not make it better in general, but just allow someone not to have to bear those burdens. So
Do you think you forgive yourself yet?
I do. Yeah. You know, like you said, the survivor's guilt thing is hard. That's a hard thing to, I think that's something that continues to, it's like, there's always a why. Why am I still here? You know? And, and I better be doing something, if I'm still here, I better be doing something that's worthwhile at a bigger picture than just myself or my family. Um, and I think that when I've struggled the most with like the suicidal ideation and everything is when I don't have a clear or even like a path to even go down for the why. And so feeling lost. And that, you know, that's when I struggle the most. So yeah.
We talked about your wife not understanding the stuff that happened in combat. It's the guys that were there with you that understood that. We agree on that. So
Yep.
the question that I want to ask about that is, at some point, your children are going to read this book. At some point, they're
Yep.
going to know who their dad was, good and bad. What do you want them to understand about who you were and who you are now?
I want them to see that no matter what happens in the world, and no matter what happens to you and the decisions that you make, that you can continue to live a life worth living after it. That, that there's no, unless it comes out of pure like psychopathic, sociopathic hatred, there's nothing that can't be made into something that is a lesson learned or made into something that can allow you to live your life. You know, they know me best because they see how I've raised them. And I hope they can read this book and say, at the end of the day, holy fuck, I never knew that about dad. Because you know, we are big on trying to parent in a way that is beneficial to them, putting all of my emotions aside. And that's been a whole nother thing to go about, you know, addressing with just frustrations with children, you know, and everything else that they do. But it has helped me to learn more about myself, and hopefully they read this book when they're older and say, I never would have really guessed that that is what dad had to go through. So
What do you think would be the biggest compliment? Them looking at you like you look at their father, like you look at your father?
I hope that they come to me, you know, right, deathbed. Is that kind of where you're getting at? Like, what's
Yeah.
the biggest
Yep.
compliment? Yeah.
Yep.
It would be thank you for, you know, an appreciation for where they're at in their life. And like, I want to see them doing greater things, huge things, better things, being better people than I ever was. And if they can look back and say, thanks for giving us the perspective on combat, helped us to make decisions that we could make that we didn't have to go to combat to do, you know, if that makes sense. Like they can draw from that and say, wow, that sucked. I'm very grateful that we don't have to have that experience to have us influence something to make it better, you know.
What's the thing that you would say to your parents, your wife, and the guys from the Marines now that you've put this book out, and whether you want to call it a form of appreciation or whatever you want to say, what do you say to parents, to the Marines, and to your wife?
I just say I love you. Like I don't. This is all. Like I hope that it. Yeah, I just that's it. I can't. There's nothing I can say other than that. I mean, I care so much about all of them. That's the only thing I if I had to say that anything, that'd be it. You know, like the amount of love I felt like a month ago when I went out to the reunion was like something I hadn't felt in a long time. I didn't realize I needed it. You know, my wife was there with me, and but seeing all those guys and seeing my parents, you know, I guess that's like I feel comfortable enough, and I love myself at this point that I want to say I love you, you know, and share that, and that's it.
So what does the name Counting on Death mean to you anymore? You just said you love your life. So what does Counting on Death
Yep,
mean to you now? Because I think it's different than what it meant back then.
totally. And that's what it. back then we were counting on death. And I think for me, it is a affirmation of like, that's where I was in my life. Like recognizing that that was a place that I was at. I was counting on my own death. We all were. We weren't expecting to come home. And with that came a lot of decisions that I think had I had an expectation to survive it, wouldn't have reared their teeth. So
So
it's a reminder.
do you think what do you think's next for you? Because I love how you put in the book, you've tried out a lot of different occupations, you've tried out a lot of different entrepreneurialships, your degrees, all that kind of stuff. What do you think is next for you? We've turned the page now, literally, with this book. So what comes next?
I mean, I'm talking about it. I have a company I own that we're building small drones, trying to support military and law enforcement, and so my focus is heavily there. I've had people ask me if I'm going to write a book on the Afghanistan deployment. I don't know. I mean, that would be a war story. I mean, that's a straight up war story, and it would be, you know, an interesting book, but it doesn't carry the weight, or in my opinion, like the lessons learned from what this is. So I've contemplated that, doing that, but that's it. Right now I'm just focusing on being a father, being present as much as I can. Um, yeah, we're homeschooling our kids. That's a huge task. My wife takes that on a lot of it, and I support when I can, but that's kind of the future. The future are our kids. So
So the last question to you would be, you're right about the future being there. What do you say to people that are either in your position that you were in right now, or the future guys that are going to be in that position? What's the piece of advice you give to them?
trust your gut. And never let go of hope. Even when everyone around you is saying like we're all going to die here, like you have to hold on to it. You have to believe it. um and that's it. Trust your gut and hold on to hope.
Okay. All right. Where can people find you? Because I want them to get this book. I want to get it in as front of many people as we can. Where can they find you on social media, websites, anything like that?
Yeah, if you go to countingondeath.com or my name joshuashores.com, they both bring you to a website with some info about the book, and then there's some links to get the book on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Walmart. You can get it on Audible. The guy who read it on Audible is I chose him. There were 3 people that got sent to me, and I chose his voice. I really enjoyed his. And yeah, I'm on Instagram and Facebook. If you search my name or the book title, you can find me there.
Do you know those handles by chance on Instagram?
Instagram, I think it's just Counting on Death, and I
Yeah.
think Facebook is too.
Okay. All right. This has been a pretty amazing conversation. I got to tell you, man, that you really laid it on the line. You told good, bad, and it is amazing to see this kind of story, because I think more than anything that people can walk away from this book is, you really put voice to that dumb kid back then, and how their just world vision changed with age, maturity, loss, grief, all of those kind of things. And you did it in a way that at times you really paint yourself in a bad light,
Yeah.
but I don't think there's any other way to do it. It was an absolutely amazing book, and I really want to see other people get this in their hands.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. And I do want to say before I forget, because I keep forgetting to, because it is, I make it very vulnerable. I am very vulnerable in the book, and I don't want to come off sounding like I didn't enjoy being a Marine or any of that. I think I make it clear that I love the Marine Corps in there, but I just want to make sure the podcasts that go out there, I loved the overall experience made me who I am today. And without that, I wouldn't be the man I am. And I forgive myself, like we talked about, for some of those decisions I made, but I am very appreciative and very proud to have been a Marine. And I'm very proud of the stuff we did in Afghanistan in the firefights and the Taliban that we killed there, those situations do not keep me up at night. It's a lot of the stuff that we talked about in the book that could have been done better. But I really appreciate everyone that has taken the time to read it, to buy it, listen, and all the support I've been getting. And thank you very much for the opportunity on the podcast here.
Well, if I can say one thing, I did not take away at any point in time during the book that you had any problem with the Marine Corps, that you
Okay,
were
good.
not proud for what you did. I
Good.
didn't take that at all, even from the beginning. And that's why we led with the first question of when the guy tells you this isn't your story to tell. No, it's exactly your story to tell. It may have
Yep.
things in it that other people don't want out there, but it's definitely your story to tell.
Yep.
And
No, and I
so,
appreciate that feedback.
yeah, I walked away from it. I at no point in time, like I said, did I ever get that feeling that you had heartburn about being a Marine or anything like that. As a matter of fact, I took a very you give a very reverent view of the Marine Corps and the stuff that you did and how it changes kids into adults
Okay,
rapidly.
thank you for that. Because I often wonder, how it's being taken. I don't get everyone's feedback, obviously, that's reading it. And I want to say too, like, talking about it, I think I go there, especially with the podcast stuff, because I feel like sometimes I'm like, God, I was such a shitbag, even though it's like that was only a small window. And to a point, though, I have to say this because this is the first time I've said it, and the first time I remembered to say it is I didn't know what the title of the book, and so for a while there, I was trying to think of names, and I'm like, should shitbag just be the name of the book? Like, and I was like, but no, it's not the whole story, but it does weigh on me for that, and justifiably, but we talked about it, and thank you for that feedback. It makes me feel good that it's being taken out there, that it's being taken the way I want it to be looked at. So
I mean, you're an author now. We can definitely say this is 100% a redemption story. 100%.
yeah,
So,
thank
yeah,
you.
it's amazing, guys. Get this book in your hand, Counting on Death. You can get it on Amazon, the audio book. You can get everything's fixed with. When is it going to hit Kindle, though? I know the book is already out on Amazon, but when is it going to actually hit
So
Kindle?
I don't know. I think it's to be October sometime. It's funny because the publishers said like the audiobook wasn't going to be out till October 18th, and I said, well, it's already out, and they're like, oh. So I don't know. I think October 18th is when Kindle might come. I have no idea.
Oh,
And it'll be on audio CD as well. I think you can buy it on a disc or download, whatever it is. That's not through Audible, but I don't know if that's even available yet. So thank you for everyone with the patience on Amazon, because Amazon for a while there, it didn't ship very very quickly, and it's finally now available as a Prime. But for a long time there, it wasn't even a Prime eligible. So yeah, thank you.
awesome. All right, guys, you know where you can find Josh. You know where you can find the book. Let's talk about where you can find me and kind of wrap this whole thing up. You can find me on Instagram at the DTD_podcast. You can find me on Facebook at the DTD podcast. And you can find me on YouTube where all these conversations, they're in video form at Dynamic Tales Delivered, the DTD podcast. But your one-stop shop, dtdpodcast.net, is going to be where you find everything. It's going to have audio, video, things that are happening, the blogs, the articles that we have written about each episode. Upcoming guests are going to be on there. You can sign up for the newsletter, all of those different things. Also, when he gets around to it, Josh is going to send me the pictures that I asked him for a long time ago, and we're going to add those on to the website just so you can get a little deeper look into what he was talking about. But those will all be there. DTDpodcast.net. Make sure you go and check it out. Lastly, let's talk about my buddy Hoot over at nomadicresearch.com. I wear the shirts every day, or at least for every show. I'm not going to say I wear them every day because that would be gross, and we don't want to do that. But every week we wear them on the show. I wear the hats on a daily basis. I use their bags when I travel. It is absolutely amazing, the quality that comes through on all of their gear. And I always tell you, if you want to look cool in the combat zone, the urban zone, just dropping your kids off at school or going to a soccer or softball game, Nomadic Research has the clothes that are going to last you and make you look like the coolest guy there or the coolest girl there, whichever one you want. Make sure you go check them out. My buddy Hoot, nomadicresearch.com. Guys, that's going to be it for this week. Thank you so much to my guest again. Thank you for bearing out everything that you did and putting it out there in such a raw way. Guys, make sure you pick up the book, Counting on Death. That's Josh. I'm DJ. This has been the show. We'll catch you guys on the next one. See you later.
Thank you.